Be me, Megan, 34, head of HR. Tired of watching the same patterns play out every day. Men interrupting women in meetings, talking over us, using that commanding tone that makes everyone just automatically defer to them. It's systemic, and I'm going to fix it. Spend weeks drafting new communication guidelines. Call them professional communication standards. Specifically target what I define as aggressive male communication patterns. Things like speaking in declarative statements without hedging language, interrupting others or building directly off previous points without explicit permission, using definitive language like "we need to" or "this will" instead of "perhaps we could consider," taking up too much space in conversations, displaying confidence without sufficient deference to others' perspectives. Present it to the executive team. They look uncomfortable, but nobody wants to be the one to push back against HR diversity initiatives. CEO Rowan just nods along, probably calculating legal liability in his head. CFO David asks a few weak questions, but ultimately signs off. Even the other women executives seem hesitant, but don't voice concerns. Roll out the policy company-wide with mandatory training sessions. Explain how these communication patterns create hostile work environments, how they perpetuate systems of dominance that marginalize other voices, require all staff to use collaborative language and inclusive discourse patterns, set up reporting system for violations, feel so proud watching everyone take notes. Finally, a workplace where everyone's voice will be heard equally, where people can't just steamroll conversations with that typical aggressive energy. First week goes smoothly. People seem to be adjusting, speaking more carefully, fewer interruptions in meetings. I catch a few violations and send gentle reminder emails. This is working perfectly. Then things start getting weird. Tuesday morning, big client presentation. Our lead developer, Jake, stands up to begin. If it's okay with everyone, and I hope I'm not overstepping, but I was wondering if perhaps I might be permitted to possibly share what could potentially be considered our proposed technical solution, assuming that's appropriate and nobody objects. Client looks confused. Presentation takes 3 times longer than planned because every statement needs qualification and permission seeking. Client asks direct questions, gets rambling non-answers full of hedge words. We lose the contract. Rowan pulls me aside. Megan, what happened in there? Jake's normally our strongest presenter. Explain that Jake is learning to communicate in a less aggressive, more inclusive way. Rowan looks skeptical but doesn't push it. Things escalate quickly. Dev team can barely function. Simple code reviews turn into hour-long sessions. I'm sorry, and please forgive me if this comes across as presumptuous, but I was wondering if you might consider the possibility that this function could potentially benefit from optimization, though I certainly defer to your expertise and don't mean to suggest I know better. Nobody can give direct feedback anymore. Bugs start slipping through because no one will clearly identify problems. Accounting department falls behind on invoicing. Sarah from Accounts Payable spends 10 minutes asking permission before explaining basic billing issues. I hope it's appropriate for me to mention, and please stop me if I'm out of line, but there might possibly be some kind of issue with the Johnson invoice, though I could be completely wrong. Even simple email chains become nightmares. Every message hedged and qualified to death. Nobody can make clear decisions or give direct instructions. Productivity plummets. The women employees are following the rules too. Lisa from marketing can't even present campaign ideas without endless qualifiers. Jennifer from sales loses deals because she can't speak confidently about our services. They're interpreting aggressive communication patterns broadly and neutering their own effectiveness. I start getting complaints, but not the kind I expected. People aren't complaining about the policy itself. They're asking for clarification on the rules, requesting more detailed guidelines on acceptable language, wanting to ensure they're in full compliance. Rowan schedules emergency meeting with executive team, conference room full of hedge words and endless qualification. Perhaps we might consider the possibility that there could be some challenges with current operational efficiency, though I certainly don't want to suggest anyone is at fault. Nobody can have a real conversation. Meeting runs 3 hours and accomplishes nothing. Clients start noticing. Our biggest account asks why everyone sounds so uncertain and indirect. Competitor swoops in with confident presentation and steals the business. Revenue drops 30% in 6 weeks. Still getting reports of violations. Thomas from IT gets written up for saying the server is down instead of, I believe there might possibly be an issue with the server, though I could be mistaken. Rebecca from legal gets reported for using the phrase, we must comply with regulations, instead of requesting permission to share her legal opinion. The malicious compliance is perfect. Everyone's following the rules exactly as written. They're being scrupulously careful to avoid any language I defined as aggressive, requesting permission before speaking, hedging every statement, deferring constantly to others, never making definitive claims. But somehow this is backfiring. The office is chaos. Nothing gets done. People seem almost robotically compliant. There's this weird energy, like everyone's performing compliance rather than embracing it. Rowan calls me in for serious conversation. Megan, we need to talk about these communication guidelines. Productivity is down across all departments. We're losing clients. The team can barely function. Explain that this is just an adjustment period. Change is always difficult. We're dismantling harmful patterns that have existed for decades. Short-term disruption for long-term equity. But people can't even answer direct questions anymore. Yesterday, I asked David for the quarterly numbers, and he spent 5 minutes asking permission to potentially share information that might be considered financial data. Tell Rowan that David is learning not to assume authority. He's being more collaborative and inclusive in his communication. This is exactly what we wanted. Rowan looks exhausted. No, Megan, this isn't what we wanted. We wanted better communication, not paralyzed communication. People are afraid to speak up in meetings. Decisions aren't getting made. We're hemorrhaging money. Suggests that maybe Rowan is uncomfortable with losing his traditional communication privileges. Maybe he's feeling threatened by more equitable discourse patterns. Rowan gets that look, the one men get when they're trying not to say something. Megan, I'm going to be very clear with you. These guidelines are causing serious operational problems. We need to revise them immediately. Notice he said, I'm going to be very clear. Classic aggressive male communication pattern. Write him up for violation of policy. Explain that his definitive language creates hierarchical power dynamics. He just stares at me. You're writing me up for telling you there's a problem with your policy. Explain that the way he's communicating is exactly what the policy addresses. He should have said something like, perhaps we might consider reviewing the guidelines if possible. Rowan suspends the policy pending review. Claim he doesn't have authority to unilaterally suspend HR diversity initiatives. Threaten legal action for creating hostile work environment. He backs down temporarily, but damage is spreading. Word gets out to other departments about the suspension attempt. People start speaking even more carefully. They're terrified of being accused of aggressive communication. Even asking for bathroom breaks becomes elaborate permission-seeking ritual. Client presentation disaster strikes again. Potential merger discussion with major partner. Our entire executive team speaks like they're apologizing for existing. We might potentially have some ideas that could possibly be worth considering, though we certainly don't want to presume to offer solutions. Partner executives look bewildered. They start asking direct questions about our leadership capability. Merger talks collapse. Board of directors gets involved. Emergency meeting called. I prepare detailed presentation on the importance of inclusive communication policies, legal necessity of addressing workplace discrimination, duty to create equitable environment. Board meeting is surreal. Executives can barely present quarterly reports. I'm sorry to potentially interrupt, but there might possibly be some financial information that could perhaps be relevant if sharing such data would be appropriate. Board members keep looking around like they're in alternate reality. Board chair Eleanor finally speaks up. What exactly is happening here? Why is everyone speaking like they're afraid of their own shadow? Explain about the communication standards, how we're working to eliminate aggressive male discourse patterns, creating more collaborative workplace culture. Megan, I've been in business for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. People can't communicate basic information. How is this helping anyone? Tell Eleanor that dismantling patriarchal communication structures requires fundamental changes, that her resistance to new paradigms might reflect internalized biases. Eleanor is not having it. This isn't about bias, Megan. This is about basic functionality. You've created a situation where nobody can have a normal conversation. Explain that normal conversation often means privileging certain voices over others. We're expanding definitions of professional discourse. Board votes to suspend policy immediately. I object strenuously. Threaten discrimination lawsuit. Point out legal liability of suppressing diversity initiatives. They seem nervous, but hold firm. Walking back to office, everyone's still following the rules. They heard about board meeting, but are being extra careful about compliance. Tom from facilities asks 15-minute permission ritual before reporting broken copier. Jennifer from sales submits written requests to potentially discuss client concerns. Check email, dozens of messages, all following policy guidelines. I hope this message finds you well, and I sincerely apologize for potentially intruding on your time, but there might possibly be a situation that could perhaps benefit from your expertise, though I certainly don't presume to know the appropriate protocol. Every single employee is robotically following the communication guidelines, but somehow it's all wrong. They're weaponizing compliance, turning my carefully crafted policy into some kind of performance art. Rowan sends company-wide email suspending the policy. Employees respond with perfectly compliant messages. Thank you so much for potentially sharing this information, and please forgive me if this response is inappropriate. But I was wondering if you might clarify whether the suspension means we should perhaps consider returning to previous communication patterns, though I certainly don't want to assume anything. The malicious compliance continues even after suspension. People claim they're confused about which rules apply when. They want everything in writing. Demand training sessions on acceptable communication post-suspension. Insist on gradual transition period with detailed guidelines. Productivity remains destroyed. Clients continue fleeing. Internal operations completely dysfunctional. But everyone's being so perfectly, maddeningly compliant with my original vision. Rowan calls me in again. Megan, the policy is suspended. Why are people still communicating like this? Explain that changing communication patterns takes time. People are probably just being cautious during transition period. Suggest he's being impatient with necessary cultural shift. No, Megan. Look at this email from the dev team. It's 3 pages long, asking permission to fix a critical bug. 3 pages for something that should be a 5-word message. Critical bug, fixing it now. Point out that his suggested alternative uses aggressive declarative language, exactly the kind of communication dominance the policy addressed. Maybe the dev team is being appropriately collaborative. Rowan looks like he wants to scream. Megan, the bug took down our entire client portal for 6 hours because nobody could get authorization to fix it through your communication maze. Suggest that having robust collaborative processes is more important than speed. Quality decision-making requires input from all stakeholders. What stakeholders, Megan? It's a bug fix. Someone needs to just fix it. Explain that just fix it mentality reflects hierarchical thinking. Dismisses collective wisdom and collaborative problem solving. Probably makes other team members feel excluded from technical decisions. Rowan puts his head in his hands. I can't even talk to you about this. You've turned basic workplace communication into some kind of theoretical exercise. Tell him that his frustration might reflect discomfort with more equitable communication structures. Suggest he consider why direct, efficient communication feels so important to him. Days pass. Chaos continues. Employees maintain perfect policy compliance despite suspension. They've formed committees to discuss appropriate transitional communication protocols. Every conversation requires consensus building and permission seeking. Decision-making process completely paralyzed. Accounting can't close monthly books because every entry requires collaborative discussion. Legal can't respond to urgent matters without stakeholder consultation. Sales team loses major client because proposal took 6 weeks to write collaboratively. I maintain that this proves how deeply embedded aggressive communication patterns were. The difficulty of transition shows how necessary the policy was. Temporary disruption is normal when challenging systemic inequities. Eleanor from board calls me directly. Megan, I need you to listen very carefully. The company is in crisis. We're losing money, clients, and credibility. This communication policy has to stop. Explain that rolling back progress on equity initiatives would send terrible message, could expose company to discrimination claims. Demonstrate lack of commitment to inclusive workplace. Megan, there's nothing inclusive about a workplace where nobody can communicate. You've created the opposite of what you claim to want. Tell Eleanor that her definition of communication might be too narrow. We're expanding possibilities for discourse beyond traditional power structures. Resistance to change often masquerades as practical concern. Eleanor goes silent for a long moment. Megan, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you think the current situation is working? Explain that defining working depends on your values and priorities. If you value speed and efficiency over inclusion and equity, then maybe it's not working. If you value dismantling harmful patterns and creating space for marginalized voices, then yes, it's working. Megan, there are no voices at all. Nobody can say anything. How is that helping marginalized people? Point out that absence of dominant voices creates opportunity for others to emerge. Silence from traditionally powerful speakers allows space for alternative perspectives. She's probably just uncomfortable with shifting power dynamics. Board meets again, votes to completely rescind policy and ban any similar initiatives. Threaten my position if I continue pushing communication restrictions. I document everything for potential legal action. Return to office. Employees still communicating in elaborate compliance patterns. They've now created formal protocols for post-policy communication. Require written requests to resume traditional discourse styles. Formed committees to evaluate appropriate transitional measures. The perfect malicious compliance continues. They're following the spirit of my policy even after it's banned. Constantly deferring, hedging, seeking permission, turning every interaction into collaborative performance art. Productivity remains completely destroyed. Rowan tries one more intervention, calls all hands meeting, stands up and says clearly, everyone needs to start communicating normally again. No more permission seeking, no more hedge words, just talk like regular human beings. Employees respond with elaborate requests for clarification. Could you perhaps define what might be considered normal communication? We want to ensure we're being appropriately collaborative. I watch this with mixture of vindication and frustration. They're proving my point about how deeply embedded these patterns are, but somehow they're also undermining everything I worked for. Their exaggerated compliance is making my policy look ridiculous. Weeks later, company starts hiring consultants to fix communication dysfunction. Consultants are baffled by what they find. Employees robotically following non-existent policy guidelines, requesting permission for basic job functions, hedging every statement to death. I get called into final meeting with Rowan and Eleanor. Megan, we need to understand what happened here. Why won't people just communicate normally? Explain that normal is subjective and culturally constructed. Maybe what they're seeing is people being more thoughtful about inclusive discourse. Resistance to change often creates temporary operational challenges. Megan, it's been 3 months. People are still asking permission to answer direct questions. This isn't thoughtfulness, it's paralysis. Suggest that their impatience with collaborative processes reveals attachment to hierarchical efficiency. Maybe they should examine why slow, consensus-based communication feels so threatening. Eleanor leans forward. Megan, I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you take any responsibility for what's happening in this office? Explain that change is always difficult. Dismantling systemic inequities requires sustained effort. Temporary disruption is normal when challenging established power structures. What about the employees who can't do their jobs? What about the clients we've lost? What about the money we're hemorrhaging? point out that those metrics reflect traditional values around productivity and profit. Maybe we should be measuring success differently, considering impact on workplace equity and inclusive culture. They look at each other. Rowan speaks quietly. Megan, you're fired. File wrongful termination claim. Document pattern of discrimination against diversity initiatives. Prepare case around retaliation for implementing equity policies. They've played right into my hands. Leave office while employees continue their elaborate compliance performance. Still requesting permission for basic communications. Still hedging every statement. Still creating committees for simple decisions. My policy lives on in their perfect, maddening adherence to its principles. Months later, hear through former colleagues that company eventually hired deprogramming consultant. Took nearly a year to get people communicating normally again. Massive financial losses. Several clients never returned. Legal fees from my lawsuit. But I know I was right. The resistance to my policy just proved how necessary it was. Their inability to adapt showed how deeply embedded toxic communication patterns had become. The chaos was evidence of systemic dysfunction, not policy failure. Now working at new company, already identifying problematic communication dynamics, planning more sophisticated approach to inclusive discourse policies. They won't catch me off guard this time. Some people just aren't ready for real change. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for equity. Next time, I'll build better enforcement mechanisms, create clearer accountability structures, develop more comprehensive training programs. The work continues. Because dismantling patriarchal communication structures is too important to abandon, even when people maliciously comply their way into proving your point. Even when they can't handle the necessary disruption of meaningful change, especially when they blame you for their own resistance to growth. They showed exactly who they really were, and I showed exactly who I really am. Someone willing to fight for justice even when it's inconvenient. Even when people weaponize compliance to undermine progress. Even when they choose dysfunction over equity. Onward to the next battle.
Be me. 26. Female. Dyed pink hair. Obviously. Master's degree in gender and intersectionality studies from a university no one's heard of, but everyone agrees is very prestigious within the right circles. Living in a deep blue city, probably the bluest part of it. My apartment is filled with Ruth Bader Ginsburg prayer candles and books with titles like Deconstructing the Male Gaze and The Heteronormative Plague. Work for a nonprofit called WOMXN for a Future Unburdened by Men, or something like that. We mostly just make infographics for Instagram. My entire social circle is a carbon copy of me. We are an army of Lunas, a legion of pink-haired, non-profit working, patriarchy-smashing warriors. We call each other Queen, unironically. My life is, by all metrics I've been taught to value, perfect. I am educated, independent, politically righteous, and have a killer skincare routine. There is only one gaping, festering wound in my otherwise flawless existence. My dating life. It's a barren wasteland, a nuclear winter of loneliness. This, of course, is not my fault. It's the patriarchy's fault. My friends and I have weekly Smash the Patriarchy wine nights, where we discuss this at length. It's because you're a strong, independent woman, Luna, says Maya, swirling her organic fair trade Malbec. Men are intimidated by that. Totally, adds Jess, who is in a polyamorous throuple with two non-binary performance artists. Their fragile masculinity can't handle a queen who doesn't need them. We all nod, sagely. It makes perfect sense. We are simply too powerful, too magnificent. The problem isn't us, it's them. My Hinge profile is a masterpiece of modern feminist signaling. Pronouns: she, her. Job: social justice advocate. Photo 1. Me at the Women's March, holding a witty, profane sign. Photo 2. Me reading a 600-page book on feminist theory, looking thoughtfully into the middle distance. Photo 3. A blurry group shot with my friends where I am objectively the most attractive one. My prompts are designed to weed out the undesirables. I'm looking for a man who isn't afraid to cry and is actively dismantling his own internalized misogyny. The key to my heart is mutual aid and a thorough understanding of Audre Lorde. Don't hate me if I correct your problematic language. The matches are sparse, and the ones I do get are horrifying. I decide to document my journey. For the cause. The Dating Chronicles. Entry number 1. The Male Feminist. His name is Leo. On paper, he's perfect. He works for a different nonprofit. His profile mentions he's a feminist ally. He has a picture of himself wearing a "The Future is Female" t-shirt. This is it. The mythical woke man. We meet for coffee at a collectively owned vegan cafe. The date begins. I just want to say, he starts, his voice trembling slightly, that I think it's so brave of you to be so outspoken. Your profile is really inspiring. I preen a little. Well, someone has to fight the good fight. Absolutely. The systemic oppression women face is it's terrible. He agrees with everything I say. Fervently. I talk about the wage gap. He nods. Unacceptable. I talk about toxic masculinity. He nods. A prison for us all. I talk about the problematic nature of air conditioning being designed for male metabolic rates. He nods. So true. I'm literally shivering for you. He doesn't have an original thought in his head. He's a walking, talking slate think piece. There is no spark, no chemistry, no anything. It feels like I'm on a date with a particularly anxious parrot. He asks me what I'm looking for in a partner. I give him my standard speech. A partner who is my equal. A man who isn't afraid of my power. Who challenges me. He nods so hard I think his head might fall off. Yes, yes. I would never be afraid of your power. I would cherish it. He looks at me with wide, adoring eyes. I feel a wave of revulsion. He's so weak. There's no spine in him. The date ends. He asks if he can see me again. I'll text you. I lie. I go home and block his number. I tell my friends he was probably a covert misogynist, trying to ally his way into my pants. They agree. The Dating Chronicles. Entry number 2. The Chad. His name is Kyle. I know I shouldn't have swiped right. I know it. He's everything I'm supposed to hate. 6 feet 4 inches, works in private equity, jawline that could cut diamonds. His photos are of him on a yacht, him skiing in Aspen, him holding a giant fish, the ultimate symbol of patriarchal capitalist excess. But, damn, my lizard brain takes over. Swipe right. We match instantly. His first message, "You up?" I should unmatch. I should lecture him. Instead, I giggle and text back. Depends who's asking. I hate myself. We agree to meet for drinks at a flashy, expensive cocktail bar. I wear my most intellectual yet sexy outfit, a black turtleneck and tight jeans. He shows up 15 minutes late, looking like he just stepped out of a magazine. He doesn't apologize. Hey, Luna, right? You look better than your pics. Let's get a drink. He orders a ridiculously expensive whiskey for himself and a vodka soda for me without asking. For some reason, I'm not even mad. I try to steer the conversation to my usual topics. So Kyle, what are your thoughts on the current socio-political landscape? He takes a sip of his whiskey and smirks. Couldn't give less of a shit, to be honest. I'm trying to make money, not feelings. Acidity. I'm floored. I try again. Well, as a woman in today's society, I feel it's important to be aware of the systems of power at play. He leans in, his voice a low rumble. You feel a lot of things, huh? He's not listening. He's just looking at me. And it's working. My stomach is doing flips. I feel like a traitor to my gender. We talk for an hour, or rather, he talks, about his portfolio, his gym routine, his plans to buy a boat. I try to interject with a point about wealth inequality. He just laughs. Babe, don't worry about it. Let me handle the money stuff. Babe. He called me babe. The date ends. He walks me to the subway. I had a good time, he says. But he's already looking at his phone. I'll hit you up. He doesn't. I wait for 3 days. Nothing. I text him. Hey, had a great time the other night. Read receipt. No reply. I am devastated. Utterly, completely heartbroken over a man who is the human embodiment of everything I claim to despise. I tell my friends he was a disgusting pig, and I saw through his act immediately. They praise my strength. That night, I cry into a pint of Ben and Jerry's. The Dating Chronicles. Entry number 3. The Normie. His name is David. He's an engineer, 5 feet 11 inches. Makes a decent living, but not Kyle-level money. He's fine. He's a perfectly acceptable human man. We meet at a casual bistro. He's nice. He asks questions about my job. He seems genuinely interested, but I can't stop comparing him. He's not as validating as Leo. He's not as hot as Kyle. He's just David. I start picking him apart in my head. His shirt is a little wrinkled. He has a slight lisp. He mentioned he enjoys watching Joe Rogan clips sometimes. That's it. The nail in the coffin. You know, I begin, my voice dripping with condescension. Joe Rogan is a gateway to the alt-right. His platform is incredibly dangerous for marginalized communities. David looks taken aback. Oh, I just thought the episodes with the scientists were interesting. That's how it starts, David. First, it's an interest in science, and the next thing you know, you're questioning settled gender theory. I go on a 20-minute tirade. I use all my big words: hegemony, kyriarchy, phallocentrism. David just sits there, his pasta getting cold. He has the expression of a man who has made a terrible, terrible mistake. When I finally run out of breath, he just says, "Wow, you've really thought about this a lot." He insists on paying the bill. He gives me a limp handshake at the door. It was educational, Luna. I know I'll never hear from him again. I feel a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. I won the argument. I proved I was smarter. So why do I feel so damn lonely? The intervention. A few weeks later, I'm having brunch with my oldest friend, Chloe. Chloe is, different. She's a lawyer. She's smart and ambitious, but she never got into the feminist theory stuff. She's engaged to a guy named Mark. Mark is a project manager for a construction company. He's a good, solid dude. He likes football and grilling. By my friend's standards, Mark is a problematic caveman. But Chloe is deliriously happy. I'm recounting my dating disasters. And then I had to explain to him how his casual enjoyment of a podcast was perpetuating centuries of patriarchal violence. I finish, expecting her usual sympathy. Chloe puts down her mimosa and gives me a look I haven't seen before. It's a mix of pity and frustration. "Luna," she says, her voice gentle, "can I be honest with you?" "Of course, Queen. Désolé, Connor. Please don't call me that. Listen, you've been on, what, a dozen dates this year? And they've all been a disaster. Because men are trash," I say, a little too loudly. "No," she says, shaking her head. "That's not it. All those dates. What's the common denominator?" I stare at her blankly. "The patriarchy?" "You," she says softly. "It's you." I feel like she slapped me. "What are you talking about?" "I'm a catch. I'm smart. I'm passionate. You're impossible," she cuts in. "You go into every date like it's a job interview where you're the CEO and they're a lowly intern you have no intention of hiring. You have this insane checklist, and if a man doesn't tick every single box, you discard him. They're not standards, Chloe. They're requirements for basic human decency. No, they're not. Must be 6 feet 2 inches or taller. Must have a master's degree in a progressive field. Must earn more than me but be willing to admit he's privileged. Must be emotionally vulnerable but also strong and decisive. Must be a feminist but not a weakling. Luna, that man doesn't exist. You're searching for a unicorn. I'm not lowering my standards. It's not about lowering your standards. It's about having realistic ones. You want a guy who is in the top 1% of looks, income, and height, but who also has the political views of the bottom 1% of the population. It's insane," she continues. "You say men are intimidated by you. Leo wasn't intimidated. He worshipped you, and you were disgusted. Kyle wasn't intimidated. He was indifferent, and you were obsessed. David wasn't intimidated. He was just a normal guy, and you crucified him for not being woke enough. You don't get it, I mutter, tears welling in my eyes. I feel attacked. She's blaming the victim. What I get, she says, her voice firm but kind, is that you're miserable, and you're blaming everyone but yourself. You claim to be this enlightened, empathetic person, but you show zero empathy for the men you date. You treat them like ideological opponents to be defeated, not like people to connect with. I leave brunch in a huff. I text my friends that Chloe has been brainwashed by the patriarchy and her relationship is probably toxic. They agree. Dump her, Jess texts. She's not a real ally, but Chloe's words, they stick with me. They're like a splinter in my brain. The rabbit hole. That night, I can't sleep. The common denominator is you. The words echo in my head. I do something I've never done before. I open an incognito tab. My fingers hesitate over the keyboard. I type it. Why can't modern women find a good man? The first few results are the usual feminist blogs and articles. 10 signs he's a toxic man baby. You don't need a man, you need a vibrator. But then I scroll down. I see a YouTube video. The title is something like, The Harsh Reality of the Modern Dating Market. The thumbnail is a graph. Curiosity gets the better of me. I click it. It's a man's voice. Calm, logical, emotionless. He's talking about dating apps, about the 80-20 rule, how the vast majority of women on the apps are all competing for the same small percentage of top-tier men, the Kyles. He puts up stats, graphs data from OkCupid and Tinder. He explains that for the average man, the dating app experience is a brutal, soul-crushing desert of rejection, while for the average woman, it's an overwhelming fire hose of attention, most of it from men she considers beneath her. He talks about hypergamy, the female instinct to date up. He's not angry or hateful. He's just laying out the facts. It's horrifying. It's everything I'm supposed to hate. This is the manosphere, the red pill, the enemy. But it makes a terrifying amount of sense. It explains Kyle. He had endless options. I was just one of 100 women in his DMs. He didn't need to put in any effort. I was disposable. It explains Leo. He was likely one of the average men, so desperate for a match that he'd contort himself into whatever shape he thought a woman wanted. It explains David, the vast, invisible majority of men who are just normal. The men that women like me swipe left on by the thousands without a second thought. I fall down the rabbit hole. For hours, I watch videos, read articles, lurk on forums. I see the world from the other side, the male perspective. I see their frustration, their loneliness, their confusion at being told they're simultaneously privileged oppressors and also expected to be providers, protectors, and mind readers. I feel sick. Everything I thought I knew, it's a lie. Feminism had given me a map of the world, a simple, easy map where I was the hero, and men were the dragons, and the patriarchy was the evil castle I had to conquer. But the map wasn't the territory. The world was infinitely more complex, and I wasn't the hero. In my own story, I was the villain. The epiphany. The next weekend is Chloe's engagement party. I almost don't go. I'm ashamed to face her, but I do. The party is at her and Mark's house in the suburbs. A real house, with a yard. It's filled with normal people, couples, families. I watch Chloe and Mark. They move around each other with an easy intimacy. He puts his hand on the small of her back. She laughs at his dumb joke. He's grilling burgers. He brings her one fixed exactly how she likes it, without her even asking. Later, I see them on the porch swing, just talking. They look so peaceful. I find Chloe in the kitchen. You were right, I say, my voice barely a whisper. She just smiles and gives me a hug. I know, but you had to see it for yourself. We talk for an hour. She tells me about her relationship with Mark. He's not perfect, Luna. He leaves his socks on the floor. He can't cook anything besides grilled meat. But he's a good man. He's kind. He's loyal. He works hard. And he makes me feel safe. He's my partner. Does it bother you that you make more money than him? I ask. It's the ultimate feminist taboo. She laughs. God, no. Why would it? He's so proud of me. He brags about me to all his friends. It's not a competition. We're a team. His success is my success, and my success is his. A team. The concept feels so foreign. I've been taught that a relationship is a power struggle. I go home that night, and I do something painful. I open Hinge, but I don't swipe. I look at the men I've rejected. My ex pile. There are hundreds of them. A teacher, smiling with his class. A firefighter, holding a puppy. A software developer, looking goofy. A plumber, looking proud of his work van. Normal men, decent men, men with jobs and hobbies and friends. Men I dismissed in a fraction of a second. Why? Because he was 5 feet 10 inches. Because he had a typo in his profile. Because he wasn't smiling with his teeth. Because he liked a sports team I hated. Because they weren't good enough. The truth hits me like a physical blow. The patriarchy wasn't stopping me from finding love. I was. My arrogance, my impossible standards, my political ideology that I wore like armor, shielding me from any real human connection. I wasn't a queen. I was a fool, sitting atop a throne of my own making, in an empty, lonely castle. The rebuilding. I delete my dating apps. All of them. I unfollow the militant feminist infographic accounts on Instagram. I start reading different books. Books about psychology, about biology, about history. I stop seeing my friends so much. The wine nights have lost their appeal. Their endless cycle of complaint and validation now sounds like the screeching of broken records. I start working on myself. For real this time. Not smashing the patriarchy work. Just work. I go to therapy. I talk about my fear of intimacy, my need for control, my crippling perfectionism. I get a hobby. I join a hiking club. At first it's just about the exercise, the fresh air. I don't talk to anyone much. I just walk, and I think. A few months go by. I'm on a difficult trail. I slip on a loose rock and twist my ankle. A man from the group comes over to help me. His name is Sam. He's a carpenter. He has kind eyes and a quiet confidence. He's not 6 feet 4 inches. He probably doesn't know who Audre Lorde is. He expertly wraps my ankle with a first aid kit from his pack. He's gentle and competent. He helps me hobble back to the trailhead, making easy conversation the whole way. He doesn't ask me what I do for a living. He asks me what my favorite mountain is. He drives me home. At my door, he asks, "Once your ankle is better, would you like to get a coffee with me?" The old Luna would have laughed. A carpenter? How provincial. The old Luna would have already calculated his potential income and found it wanting. The new Luna just smiles. A real, genuine smile. I'd love that, I say. Our first date is coffee. We just talk. About hiking, about woodworking, about our families, about stupid movies we like. There's no checklist, no interview, no ideological purity test. It's easy. He tells a joke. It's dumb. I laugh. A real belly laugh. He looks at me when I laugh, and his eyes crinkle at the corners. I feel a spark, a real one. Not the confusing, self-destructive pull I felt for Kyle. Not the pity I felt for Leo. Just a simple, warm, human connection. We go on a second date. A hike, a slow and easy one. We reach a viewpoint, looking out over the valley. The sun is warm on my face. The air is clean. Sam is standing next to me, not saying anything. Just enjoying the view with me. He reaches over and takes my hand. His hand is calloused and strong. It fits perfectly in mine. He smiles at me, and I smile back. Be me. 27, standing on a mountain, holding hands with a good man, feel the sun on my face. Maybe, just maybe, This is what it's supposed to be like.